We really enjoyed The Far Side of the Desert. It was gripping. It was as if there was an action movie unfolding in front of us. However, it's a story that also observes the art of personal growth and purpose, as well as being juxtaposed with regional conflict and drugs and arms trafficking and rape and murders. Are you able to tell us where you received your inspiration to write Far Side of the Desert, or is that a scary question? Like, did you, this
No,
kind of
it's
based
not.
on reality?
It's not. Well, the plot is not based on anything I've been through, I'm happy to say, nor anybody I know. But the first inspiration was actually at a Penn Congress, I think, thinking back, it's been a long time, in Santiago de Compostela, which is my first time there. And the festival is just a charming festival. Penn happened to have its International Congress during the festival of St. James there. And they had the large puppets and everything. But also at that Congress, I was elected what is called the chair of the Writers in Prison Committee for Penn, which is the person who's overseeing all of the human rights work and working for writers. And at that Congress, we had a surprise visitor, which is Salman Rushdie, who had not really appeared much since the fatwa. And I had been president of the center the year of the fatwa, so I'd been very engaged in that. And a few of us had dinner with Salman, and he spoke to the Congress. It's the one and only time we've ever had metal detectors going into the Congress at Penn. But he was under high security then. And I think I just began thinking, what would it be like if you just had to vacate your life, or your life was taken from you? And so I think the germ of the idea began there. As any writer will tell you, there's so much that comes into writing a novel. And for me, I didn't have a plot necessarily when I started. And I was working on another book at the time. But that's the seed of the idea. And then, as often happens, you get into it and you get into the characters, and then the characters begin to inform the novel for you. That sounds a little mystical, but most novels will tell you that's what happens.
Yeah.
You get the engine going. You begin to see the characters. You begin hearing their voices in your head, and you're both shaping where it's going, but those voices and the understanding of those characters begin also telling you where it's going. So it's a bit of a dance.
Yeah.
And the book took a number of years and many drafts, and it didn't get published right away. I wrote the next novel, then went back to this novel, and that's happened with my last two novels. They've been published when I wrote them. They would have been fairly prescient. Now they're historical. But nobody at the time was looking at what was happening in the Sahara Desert in terms of ice, any of that. None of that was in the headlines.
Right.
And as it began to emerge in the headlines, I said, well, it's here. I've already written that. I'm starting to write it because it seemed to me a logical place that mischief was going on.
Yeah. And actually, maybe it's better that it's kind of a historical, because perhaps it would have been too much to read at the time.
It well could have been. It well could have been. And a good friend of mine, a longtime colleague, is still a noted reporter who covers the Middle East well and all that. And she's one of the blurbs, Robin Wright. And she said, Joanne, this is absolutely right, but it should be ISIS, not Al-Qaeda. I said, Robin, it's neither in any way. It's set in 2007, so it couldn't be ISIS. But so in the last two books, I've had some top journalists that I've known and respect read it and say, you've got the facts right. But this is a novel. It's not a piece of journalism. It's really about character.
Yeah, yeah. Was it difficult to write? Did you have to have plenty of breaks when it became a bit too intense? I mean, how long did it take to edit and review it? And
Oh, I can't even tell you, because it's been over. I fortunately or unfortunately, have not written them and they've gone to print. So I've written them, they haven't gone to print. So I've written the next book, then gone back to them and rewritten them, then gotten input from people. So it's been a very iterative process. The challenging part of this one were some of the characters. It was very challenging for me to come to terms with who the character Stephen Oroya Safir Rahim was, to really understand who that person was. And the elder was also a person, because I in no way wanted to have just played a type or create a straw man. I really wanted to try to get behind who these people were, these forces were that were at play.
Excellent.
So that was a challenge.
Yeah.
And then the other the other challenge is the plot itself, what happens in the desert. I said, is this possible, or is it just my imagination? And so then I began doing lots of research just to see if there were any factual places I could say, yes, well, and in fact, there are some very long time ago research of where these kinds of things were happening, where in fact there were these kind of camps going on. So I thought my imagination was not totally
Yeah.
at odds with what facts were.
Absolutely. I mean, with all your experience, it's probably you absorbed quite a bit of, you were informed just by your observations, I suppose, and your experiences. We understand your particular focus outside of your writing has been, in fact, the field of human rights and education, and particularly education in undeveloped regions of the globe. And is that still the case, or are there other 2 or 3 extra agendas on your plate at this moment?
Yeah. Well, those have really been the focus. It is, the singular intervention. I think, the world, whoever can make is in education. If you can get children educated, you make a big difference. So that has been human rights. Without human rights, these children, all of us, are challenged. I think the one that I would add with more focus than perhaps I've had in the past is refugees.
Right.
It's alarming the state of refugees around the world, and I work in that field as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Well done. So you're a novelist, short story writer, journalist, whose works of fiction include The Dark Path to the River, No Marble Angels, Burning Distance, which was the one that was the book released this year, and now your upcoming novel, The Far Side of the Desert. And you've also got a literary non-fiction book, The Pen Journeys, Memoir of Literature on the Line, which is filled with anecdotes of courageous writers, including some well-known like Salman Rushdie and Orhan Pamuk. You're also the former International Secretary of PEN International and a Vice President of PEN International, amongst your many other roles that serve to protect writers from around the globe and focus on issues of freedom of expression and human rights, as well as conflict resolution, education, development, and refugee issues. So I'm just reading this out, so that's why it sounds a little bit, but just as you mentioned, refugee. Can you share some of your most satisfying achievements? I mean, there should be quite a few, but can you share a few of your top 3 satisfying achievements in these roles that you have?
Well, I think starting with PEN, it wouldn't just be mine, but anytime a writer whose case you've worked on actually gets released from prison, you can't by any means take responsibility that you did it, but you were one of the hands pushing on that door, trying to get the prison open.
Yeah.
And that's very satisfying. I remember the first time that happened, I was president of the Penn Center there were 2 Penn Centers in the US at the time, and one was based in Los Angeles on the West Coast. And we had gone to a Congress in Seoul, South Korea. And a publisher who had been in prison for a long time, and we'd met with his family. And those who sort of were at the higher levels of PEN at the time actually met with the government. And when we came back, they did release some of the prisoners, and one of them was the case we had worked on. So that was very satisfying because we actually had met with the family and knew that and knew the case. And since then, there have been numbers of people. The disappointments are when that isn't successful, and in fact, a writer is killed. PEN never lets go of a case, so you work on it, as long as it takes. But they haven't all. I worked along with so many people on the case of Liu Xiaobo in China, and that was a big sadness for all of us.
Yeah.
In education, I've worked with a number of organizations. I think in that field, one that comes to mind is I worked with Save the Children on early childhood education, and we worked on a project to develop village schools using the community that had some education, training them and making sure girls were in those schools. And it became, I can't take credit at all for it happening other than just being part of those who were working on this. And it became a very successful model in Mali, and others came in and grew it from 40 schools to 400 schools and expanded that program in Mali. Now, unfortunately, in a number of these countries, even though you see progress, then you see backsliding, and Mali's had a lot of problems since. But that was very satisfying.
Mm.
You know, in all of these, you know, you just are one person among many.
Yeah.
That's trying to, you know, advance whatever better state of the world can be. And
Right.
it's the pleasure is getting to know the people you work with. Somebody once asked me in London, how did you survive the London cutthroat literary scene? And this is a very well-known writer. And I said, well, you know, actually I worked with Penn, and there, you're working with either the best of writers or writers at their best, because they're really not working to advance their careers. They're not cutthroat. They're really working to help others. And so that's a pleasure.
Yeah, I really liked how you said that. Yeah. Yeah. So which country or countries have occupied the most attention, held the most writers in prison while you've been engaged with Penn?
Oh, well, that's decades have been the same people at the top of the list: China and Turkey. You know, different countries. In China, the sentences are long. In Turkey, they just rotate people out. But most writers have usually been in China and in Turkey.
Right. Okay.
And Turkey's been much easier to visit and get to know the writers and be there. China has been a more closed society, open for a while. We got to visit. Now it's closed back up again.
Closed back up again.
But the nice thing in China is that there are so many talented writers who really advocate for democracy and for a more open society. And we do have a Penn Center called the Independent Chinese Penn Center, which has half of its membership in China, half outside of China.
Oh.
And they work together. And 𝐷 𝘍𝑀 was, you know, one of the founders of it and early president of that center. Yeah.
Well, what about now talking about banning of books? I mean, the top 5 countries that account for government book bans are India, China, Singapore, Ireland, and Australia. And then there's the 6th, which is the US. Now, I don't know why Turkey isn't there. Perhaps they're more into imprisoning their writers rather than banning their books. But what do you think about book censorship in general? I mean, I'm sure you don't think very highly of it at all, but just a few words.
I think it's so problematic. If you start trying to restrict ideas that people can consider, you're on the road to a authoritarian society. I mean, there's just, once you say you can't think these thoughts, you can't read these thoughts, you can't consider these thoughts, it's very problematic. Fortunately, in the US, writers are not put in prison. Yeah. But as soon as that happens, we are definitely, the canary has died in the coal mine. So to have, it's very problematic to me to have a government tell people what they can and cannot, or children what they can and cannot read. Clearly, school districts and school boards want to consider what, books at what ages children read. I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah.
But the books should not be banned. The library should not be told what they can and cannot have.
Right.
Just responsibility to put a curriculum together. That's quite different than banning a book. And of course, what happens when you ban a book, it becomes more popular. I'm sure the sales of many of these books have perhaps gone up because so many writers are offended. These books are banned. They'll go out, we will go out and buy the book.
All the kids become a little bit more, interested in reading.
What is this that I'm not supposed to read?
Yeah.
But if you start discriminating on what ideas you can consider and how you can consider them.
That's what I've said to my daughter. I've said that, I don't mind what you read. I don't want you to watch anything that's not in your age group. I mean, I need to see what you're reading, of course, at the end of the day, but you can read whatever. I don't mind.
Yeah.
But,
well, I think it's reasonable. I mean, a parent does that. You don't expose your children to ideas before they're ready. And some of you perhaps hope they never are exposed to, but essentially they're going to grow up and be adults and have to know how to make discriminating choices. And if they haven't ever seen how to do that, then you sometimes cause a problem you don't need to. And writers with the imagination need to be able to consider and think and imagine. Yeah. And it's troubling.
It's very troubling. I mean, it's like you said earlier about the government being in, sticky fingers in private lives, and it's and the choice that a person has to read whatever they really want to read, and
trust citizens. I think trust your citizens to be smart and educated and discriminating and caring.
Yeah, just like trust your body to the choice that you have with it. Anyway, let's not get onto that. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. And I mean, when you sit down to write a new novel, what do you do? Do you have like a general outline of the plot? Do you have a set time of the day that you like to write and a set time that you like to edit? Or do you put it away for a month or a few years and then pull it out? I know you've mentioned earlier that you did that with The Far Side of the Desert, but generally when you're working on a novel, like is it like a 9-to-5 job, or is it whenever the inspiration hits?
Well, my best days are when it can be a 9-to-5 job, when I really have an open, I love to look at my calendar and say, I have nothing today. I can just write all day. There are not that many days I can do that, but, I do. I am a writer who loves to write. So it's not an oppressive time for me, and it's very nice to do that. But that's not always the case. So my best days are when I can start writing in the morning and get good 6 hours of writing. So if I can start by 9 and work until 3. That's a really good day. In terms of how each book begins differently. Often they begin with a question that you're trying to answer, or they begin with a character, or sometimes with a few words or an observation. And you just have enough, you're interested enough, you want to follow that trail and see where that's leading. And it begins to unfold. For most books, I have notebook after notebook after notebook of notes to myself and notes and outlines and everything, but I don't write by an outline. I have where it's going, some points along the way. But part of the fun is finding out where you're going. I mean, part of the fun is, the journey. I like to tell the story of one book where, and I also try to end a writing day wanting to know what happens next, so on a sort of a tiny cliffhanger each day. And one day I remember in this book, there was somebody behind the door that was going to come into the scene, and I ended the day and I said, well, it's one of these two characters, and I finished my day. I was raising children at the time and went off and been a mom. And I came back and sat down, and somebody else came through the door, and I went, oh my gosh, that's the person behind. Now I know that. And I sort of hadn't known that until I had started writing it. So you often don't really know until it's on the page, and then it works. And that's fun. I mean, that's part of the fun of writing novels.
Yeah, of course. So with publishing, just to sort of segue into another area, in the olden days, you'd have like a traditional publisher, traditional publishing house, and now there's a lot of self-publishing. What do you think are the pros and cons of self-publishing generally in the field of books?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't self-published, but I know the amount of work it takes to get a book into the marketplace. And if you really haven't been able to get a book in there and you want to do all of that, then you can do it. But I've never done that because, even as it is, I have a publisher I really am happy with the editorial interaction. They produce beautiful books. They're wonderful to work with. But the marketing, the getting it into the marketplace, in large part, even if you're with a big publisher, is on the writer's shoulders. And so you have to figure that out. So I think it's a lot to do. But because there's so much more self-publishing and Amazon and all, there's so many more books, it seems to me, out there. So the competition to get attention and to get noticed and to get in bookstores and whatever it takes is oddly greater, I think, than it used to be when it was more hierarchical structure. But there's more opportunity for those books to be out there. So each writer, finds their path. Many people said, well, why don't you just publish it? I said, I don't want to publish a book. I want to have that sense of somebody else reading it, liking it, seeing the market for it, and being a team behind me. Yeah. And that's been important.
Yeah, it's like a bit of a security blanket in one way, but it's also like a way of qualifying your work. I mean, sometimes these self-published books are just so badly written, and I feel that it, across the board, it's kind of lowered the quality, I think. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
I think you can. I think for self-published books, it's very hard probably to get review attention. I think they don't, I don't really know, but I just know how much work it takes, even being published with a publisher, to get the book out. You just multiply that to go through the whole process. But some writers, very entrepreneurial. They really have a sense of business as well as their writing. It's fun for them, and so they take that path.
Yeah, fair enough. And what about these novels that have been written completely by ChatGTP?
I haven't even read those. I don't know.
What a nightmare. Yeah. Okay, so your son, Elliot Ackerman, is a New York Times bestselling author and former Marine Corps Special Operations team leader. He won a Silver Star, Bronze Star for Valor, and a Purple Heart. And he is now a well-acclaimed novelist and journalist. And his second novel was a finalist for the US National Book Award. You must be very proud of each other. And of course, your Olympiad son, your second son, sorry. Have you ever considered writing? Sorry?
The Olympian was the first son.
The first son, and Elliot's the second son. You've got two sons, correct? Yeah. Have you ever considered writing a novel with Elliot, or had you ever spoken about doing something like that?
We actually wrote, and all three of us wrote a novel together when they were children. We wrote a children's book together.
Oh, okay.
They were maybe 8 and 10 or 7 and 8, and I started doing it with them because my mathematician son, who was the Olympian, was very literal, and I just wanted to help spring open his imagination. And Elliot's imagination was huge, and I wanted to help him shape it.
Right.
And so and when I would take them to school every day, pick them up, we lived in Los Angeles, and there was a round hotel on the freeway, and I would make up stories about the mice in the hotel, this whole narrative. And every day they wanted me to tell them a story. And I'd say, well, where did I leave off? And they would tell me.
Yeah.
So when we went to write a book, we decided to write a book about the mouse hotel, we called it.
Aww.
But I couldn't remember all the stories I told them, but they could remember all of them. So we would have story conferences, and they would tell stories I'd told them. We moved to Europe at the time, and we would have story conferences, which we traveled. And my mathematician son would make sure there were no inconsistencies. He was very good at that. And Elliot was great about descriptions. I would say, what does this character look like? And Elliot would say, he's tall, but his feet are too small and his ears are too big. So it was really fun because it brought us together. It did, from an educational point of view, exactly what I hoped. And that now my mathematician son has a very open and fluid imagination. And Elliot has clearly proved himself and shaped all of his imagination into being a really fine writer.
Wow.
So we have, but that's as far as we've gone in terms of fiction together.
Right.
Elliot and I have given a few readings together, but mostly we're on different tracks.
That's amazing. Proud mama. So tell us about your journey to become a published author. Like, was it difficult in the beginning? Did you have any challenges in the earlier days as a budding writer, or was it relatively easy?
For me, it was not as easy. I began my career as a journalist, and so that's really was helpful because my job was to write every day. Publish 3-4 times a week. Interview people. Dialogue's very easy for me because I've done so much interviewing, and just to see my name in print, on 2 or 3, 4 times a week, and that career in a way was a base. But I left it because I wanted to write fiction, and I began teaching as well. But I really wanted to write fiction. But it was a long time before that fiction came together and found a publisher. And my first published book was a short story collection. But half of those stories are parts of novels that hadn't been published, but they divided into stories. And then the next novel came out fairly soon after that. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. That was The Dark Path to the River. And then we moved abroad, and all of the connections I'd made, all that plugging in, I just pulled all the plugs and went abroad. And it was not so easy getting back into the publishing, getting the books published.
Right.
But being a writer, I just kept writing. So if the first one didn't get published, I started the second one. If that didn't get published, I rewrote the first one, started the third one, rewrote the second one, started the fourth. I just kept writing.
Yeah.
And the thing now is these novels, one, I will say they are better now than they would have been when I thought I was first finished. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
And this stage of life, it's sort of very nice to have this body of work to go to and begin getting out the door.
I'm sure. And when you read them again, do you ever feel like, oh, I could change this or I could change that? Or do you not?
Always. I taught writing for numbers of years, and my students used to ask me, how do I know when I'm done? And my answer always was, when you're published. You know, so
Because that's you can't go back
you're
there.
not done published because you can always go back and make them better.
Yeah.
You know, there's always another idea. You can change this word, you know. In fact, I know some writers, I'm told, who, you know, would walk into somebody's house and see their book on the shelf and pull it out and begin making edits on the published book.
Oh my God.
I'm not that bad,
Yeah.
but you can edit forever. So when you're published, that's nice because you're done. You
Definitely. And what are you working on now? If you can talk to us about it.
Yeah. Well, at the moment I'm reading through again two novels that I have that I think are almost ready, and I'm just going through to edit and see what I need to do to help shape, tighten, expand those two.
Mm-hmm.
And then another novel in I don't know what draft form I'm in that might end up being a small series. The mystery, that might be a young adult mystery. I don't have to figure that out yet. So
a young adult,
a lot. And then, you know, my publisher, you know, good for them, said I used to write a blog once a month when I first got a website back in like 2007-8, because I figured I needed to join the 21st century. And they said, you know, these are really good, but nobody knows they're there unless they go to your website. You need a newsletter. And then somebody else said, no, you don't need a newsletter. You need a Substack. So I joined the world of the Substack. So now once a month, I put out a Substack, which includes the blog, includes the profile of a writer or two at risk, includes some book recommendations, includes some funny vocabulary words I think I'll never use, but they're fun to know, and just includes different things. And it's been fun. It's like your own tiny little magazine.
Right.
It doesn't have a lot to do, but it's, you know, a discipline. And so I do a Substack once a month.
Okay.
Called On the Yellow Brick Road.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, that's good.
So 21st century is a Substack writer.
Yeah. Okay.
But
I have never heard of it, to be honest. So
that's the new. It's the new. You'll look and see. It's a new thing that people are doing Substacks, and many charge for them, and, you know, make money from them. Mine are free. But
oh, really? Okay. That's
those who have 1 million followers and charge $10 pretty well.
okay. Like Bookstagram and stuff.
Yeah.
I see. So one question before we go, how do you deal with like constructive criticism or any kind of criticism? Really, do you take it on the chin, or do you pull the blinds and get under the covers and kind of get upset like some writers I know do?
Yeah, well, maybe because I began my career as a journalist, I listen to what might be good about it, and if I don't think it's good, then I don't listen to it. But I never get offended by criticism. I always want to make it as good as I can, and want to know how it feeds back. And so sometimes the advice is good. Sometimes the advice isn't. The criticism and the solution aren't what you need, but what they're pointing out you need to address. I can give one example. In the Dark Path to the River, I can't remember who it was that said that. Must have been an editor of some kind. Said, you know, I really think you need to get rid of this character. Well, this is one of my main characters. I went, what? You know, well, tell me. And so my answer was, well, tell me why you think I need to. And then when they told me why, I said, okay, I'll handle the problem. It's certainly, the answer was not to get rid of the character, but it was to distinguish the characters better among themselves. So sometimes my advice to other writers is listen to the critique, but don't necessarily listen to their answer, because they're not the writer. You know, people will see a problem, but then they'll try to tell you how to solve it. And they very often, what they want to do to solve it is not going to solve it. So you can listen to what the critique is, listen to the critique, but you're the writer. So put that critique in and figure out the right way to solve the problem. Sometimes it's not a problem, but, you know, sometimes you're writing so people can understand you. And if people say, I don't understand you, say, well, tell me why you don't understand me. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you still teaching now? Or?
I don't. I taught for about 15 years. Certain writers come to me, and I certainly, I'll read their work, give my thoughts. So in that way, individually. In the early days of Eliot, I read his early drafts, and now he has an editor, and his wife is a writer, and he has an agent. So I don't really get the early drafts anymore. But for the first number of novels I did, so I was able to, give my best thoughts, and he was always receptive to them. He often listened or didn't listen, but we had a nice relationship that way.
Yeah.
And so an ad hoc basis, I I guess that could be called teaching, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly happy to interact with manuscripts that of people that I care about.
Yeah. And who is your first reader generally?
Oh, it's interesting. That's changed over the years. I have one very good friend who, for the first few novels, would be one of my early readers. And these novels, I'm sitting there. Who should I give this to? But I have a number of writer friends who, we'll read for each other. And so
Yeah.
if you look at acknowledgments, you'll see a long list of people that read along the way. I don't know. I can't remember who the first used to be. I don't know if she's still going to be. When most writers have friends who read their work, give their feedback, and you do it for each other. I have one good friend, fairly well known, who says, "I don't have an editor anymore. The editors aren't editing. They're acquiring, but they're not editing. Would you read this?" And seeks it out. And so I sort of act as an early editor for part of her work.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's so nice to meet you finally. And thank you so much for your invaluable advice and anecdotes and stories. And thank you for your work in Penn International and for your lovely, graceful interview style and easygoingness. You're not not as scary as I thought you might be. Not at all.
I can't even think why I would be scary to anybody, but
no, you're not at all. I'm only kidding. You've just
on paper we all look scary, perhaps.
You've just faced so much danger, and you've done so many incredible things. And I was a little bit, in awe. And I'm just delighted to have had the opportunity to talk to you, and really admire you and your work, and really enjoyed The Far Side of the Desert, and looking forward to have the big publishing date in March. So thank you once again.
Well, as I often tell people, you live long enough, you do lots of things.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And the other advice that I think is worth hard, especially to young women who are trying, I can say you can have it all, but not necessarily at the same time.
Right.
Because that's certain stages of life. You're trying to raise families, you're trying to have a job, you're trying to write books, and it's hard to do it all at the same time sometimes. So you have to give yourself a break. Life is long.
Yeah.
That's
good advice.
Long journey. There's lots you can get done, but give yourself a break and pat yourself on the back sometimes.
Welcome, and thank you very, very much for joining us today here at Author Link.